Good morning. This is Rebecca Strauss with Miller Johnson. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for our webinar where we welcome Bob VandePol from Pine Rest Christian Services. Before we get started with Bob, I want to update you on the latest news regarding COVID-19. First of all, this seems like a lifetime ago, but it was actually only March 23rd that Governor Whitmer issued our first stay-at-home order. That was a Monday and took effect that night, so it really started that Tuesday. But if we consider that a full week, we have now been under the terms of that order for 4 full weeks. This is our 5th week. So congratulations to all of you and to all of us for hanging in there during this time. Bob's going to give us some advice on how to do that even better in the coming weeks. The coronavirus deaths in the United States reached 40,000 this weekend, which is obviously bad news and very sad news, especially for the families impacted. There are over 755,000 cases now in the United States. In Michigan, we are over 31,000 cases with 23,000, well, almost 24,000 deaths. Some good news. The daily confirmed deaths in Michigan are trending downwards. So we hope that we have reached our peak here and are now on the downward slide. Protests against various states' stay-at-home orders continued over the weekend. Of course, we saw a large protest here in Michigan last week. And in Washington, D.C., congressional leaders and the White House have said that they are close to a deal extending the PPP loans. They look like they're going to add another $300 billion or $310 billion to that program, which the Treasury Department believes will be enough to fund all of the small businesses who need that loan. With that, I will introduce my friend and partner, Mary Tabin, who will be presenting this webinar with me. Mary, would you like to take it away?
Thank you, Rebecca. Sure. So today, as Rebecca mentioned, we have the privilege to have Bob VandePol with us. So we could fill up the hour with Bob's credentials, but I want to take a few minutes to introduce him if you haven't had the honor to work with him before. Bob is a sought-after resource for his deep experience and knowledge regarding crisis management. Prior to joining Pine Rest, he was the president of Crisis Care Network, helping to lead it from a startup to the world's largest provider of critical incident response services to the workplace. So for example, Bob has managed CNN's command center in Manhattan after the 2001 terrorist attacks. He's led crisis teams in response to high-profile tragedies, such as the Boston Marathon bombing, Sandy Hook school shooting, and Las Vegas shootings. Bob has also worked with helping employees and employers overcome natural disasters and our nation's prominent university-based tragedies. Bob frequently consults with businesses, universities, schools, and churches regarding how leaders can accelerate organizational recovery following crisis. Bob, we're going to get into our first question so our audience can hear from you firsthand. Now, obviously, you have assisted organizations navigating through many different crises over the years. Regarding COVID-19 that we all are facing, how is that crisis different?
Good morning, everybody. This one is really, really different. So when I was with Crisis Care Network, we responded to about 1,200 workplace incidents per month. It was not uncommon for us to respond to 10 bank robberies per day. But most of the incidents were sudden impact. Something awful happened. You all looked at each other, and shortly thereafter, you started to think about recovery. How do we get back to work and life as a person? And how do we as a business or an organization reopen our doors and begin being productive again? How do we pull our team together and do so? This is different. And I just want to acknowledge that this is really different. And the analogy I like to draw is the discrepancy between a tornado and a hurricane. So we responded to the tornadoes that hit Joplin, Missouri, and down in the South, Alabama especially. Remember those. And it was awful. The tornado came in, it destroyed the whole town. People were hurt and killed, and everything was a mess. But a matter of a few hours after the tornado, here came people outside with chainsaws and forklifts, and everybody ran to Home Depot and Lowe's and began rebuilding. In fact, I have a very memorable picture from one of our consultants just a couple of hours after the Joplin, Missouri tornado, where there was a double rainbow in the sky. So you could, okay, that happened. It was awful. Let's go. Hurricanes are different because they often involve floods, and floods last and last and last, and they smell bad. And you sit and you wait until you know what to do to really begin recovery. There are smart things to do. There are unsmart things to do while you're waiting, but you wait. And this is much, much more like a hurricane than a tornado. Rebecca, you were mentioning before the call that you're a runner. And so if I said, hey, let's go run a K, you would look at me and you'd say, is this a 5K, a 10K, or 20K? What is it? Because you pace yourself and you use different skills as you go through it. Folks, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And that's difficult. Another thing that's really difficult, and I remember being down in the Gulf during Hurricane Katrina, seeing the people's eyes when they saw resources coming in from 47 other states. And so you saw people coming in with demolition and construction and medical and food and educational resources. And it was wonderful because the cavalry was coming over the hill to the rescue. COVID-19 is like Hurricane Katrina hit the whole world at the same time. And there's nobody coming. So I need to, and especially we need to, work together because this one's really different. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and we really need to trust our teammates. This one's different.
Thanks, Bob. We've got a number of, we've got a variety of clients who are joining us on the call this morning. Some had to shut down their operations completely. Some had to transition their folks to working from home, similar to a Miller-Johnson model, right, where we're all still up and running, but from home. And others are continuing in-person operations, whether that be in healthcare or in manufacturing or food production. For our clients who have employees still coming to work in person, what kinds of psychological or emotional stresses might those employees be experiencing, and what can we do to help them?
Okay, great question. And frankly, we're going through this at Pine Rest also. Many people are in the hospital providing patient care, direct patient care, and it feels really strange with people wearing masks and having all of the personal protective equipment and all the new procedures. And anybody who doesn't have patient care is almost banned from campus and working from home. You know, oftentimes we've heard, and this could be a whole nother webinar talking about the neuropsych piece of what happens when a threat presents itself. But you've heard about fight, flight, freeze, okay? And typically we think about fight, flight, freeze within the context of, you know, here comes a bad guy who's going to rob me, or here's some sudden impact accident that happens in a factory or in trucking or manufacturing. The threat does not have to be a bad guy with a gun. The threat can be feared loss of that which is precious to me. And so what your employees are experiencing is very much akin to fight, flight, freeze, all of which have survival value if you're in a military operation, all of which have survival value if you are in certain assault contexts, but they're really difficult when it's a marathon, really difficult. So you're going to have employees who go in to fight, and they're going to be extremely self-focused. They're going to be black and white thinking. They're going to be linear. They're going to be more defensive than usual, sometimes more offensive than usual. And all you have to do is go onto Facebook and you'll see all the rants back and forth about, is it an overreaction? Is it a conspiracy theory? Are we not doing enough? How could people be gathering socially? And so you're going to see increased conflict. It's limbic, it's coming out of the part of our brain that protects us. And so sometimes our best defense is a good offense. And so you're going to see offensive people. You just are. Some people are going to take flight, and you have a high risk of absenteeism or presenteeism, where if people are to come to your location, they're there, but they're not there. And frankly, presenteeism is a greater drain on productivity than absenteeism is. Sometimes you're going to lose people, and your replacement and training costs are there, the loss of intellectual and relational capital that you may have. And then when people are in flight mode, they tend not to communicate because they are focused on me. And then freeze, when people hunker down too much, they're ineffective, they're indecisive. And if your people check out and stay for longer, there are all kinds of experts from the insurance world who can tell you that you now have really elevated risk of workers' comp and disability claims. And so it's very, very difficult. It's a real leadership challenge now to keep some sense of community when you have people who have to show up and those who can't show up and those who have the option to show up, because there's a greater risk of finger pointing and your team becoming fractioned. It's interesting. I think where you're going with this one next is, so what do you do? What can a leader do to keep their folks and to keep their folks rowing in the same direction, in the same boat? And so I'm just going to ask you all as leaders to think about, what do people see when they see me? We all have, there's an unconscious bias. Think about when you weren't a leader in your organization. Maybe think about your first job and you looked at the leaders. It was like, whoa, they know everything. They have power. They can decide my schedule, my performance appraisal, my advancement. It's almost like when you're in first grade and you saw the eighth graders in elementary school. It's like they seemed so powerful. Sometimes leaders, we forget that we have that role. What do people see when they see us? Do they see somebody who knows their stuff, who's tough enough to handle this, and who cares about me? That's really important. I'm going to pause and breathe. Next question, please.
Okay, Bob. So following up on Rebecca's last question, where she was talking about and focusing on employees that are coming to work in person, what about those employees that are teleworking for the first time and their psychological and emotional stressors? Can you identify some of those for us that are teleworking? And then again, the same type of follow-up of what can leaders do to help these employees?
Sure can. And it's, if there was ever a situation that was ripe for fragmentation of a team, this is it, because you don't see each other every day and you don't have water cooler conversations. And it's difficult. I know for myself, these days feel like they're 30 hours long, and I'm having a harder time setting boundaries on myself. I'm working way more hours from home than I did when I commuted in and worked in an office. It's harder to set those boundaries. Another thing that's really fearful, I want you to go back to fight, flight, freeze, okay? So let's pretend that we are a deer during hunting season, right? So I hear shots fired. What does a deer look like right now? Its muscles are poised to spring, fight, flight, freeze. Its eyes are big, its ears are up, its nostrils are flared. Why are all of its senses so engaged? It's because it needs information. It needs to know where's the threat, how close is it, and which of those three options do I take? When we telecommute, when we're working from home, we lack some of the information that helps us to be successful. And if we're already afraid, you know how that goes. Nature hates a vacuum. And if people don't have information, they make stuff up, usually creatively and often destructively. So staying connected and continuing to provide support, continuing to provide information is really, really important. In all the research about how to help people through an event that's traumatic or at least disturbing, they come up with 5 words. 5 words. If these elements are in place, your people are more likely to move through this stressor well. The first one, and I just want you to think about, in your work context, what are some action steps we can take that would produce these 5 elements? And the first one is safety. Boy, that one's big here. So whatever you can do to produce safety from the virus in your workplace, that's important. Now, not only is the actual safety important, but the perception of safety is important, okay? So if a bank gets robbed, oftentimes they will put a security guard in the lobby for several days. Why? Is it because that will actually reduce the likelihood of those employees being robbed again? No, it's not. But it does increase the likelihood of those employees returning to work the next day. That's why it's done. So if you do something to produce safety, make certain that you communicate it so that people know. That safety also has to include, within the relationship, emotional safety with you, their boss. People need to know that I can share honestly how I'm doing with my boss without being punished for it later. And so can I trust my boss in that way? Okay. Next element, second element, is community. The more you can do, and thank the good Lord for Zoom and WebEx and BlueJeans and all the platforms that I've been doing these past few weeks, where you can actually see somebody. I mean, if you can see them and hear them, okay, you can't smell them or touch them, but that really helps. How can we build community? How can we have a culture where we trust each other enough to be honest with each other? Because research study after research study says that if people pull together and draw strength from an organization or a group that they trust, they borrow tremendous ego strength and believe, I can be strong because we're strong. The strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. So community is important. What can we do to continue to be a team with a boundary around us that offers us identity? The third is calm. Okay, so again, I'm going to bring you back to, what do people see when they see you? Do they see somebody who presents as, okay, I don't have all the answers for this, but we're figuring it out. We are seeking out smart people. We're seeking out resources. We are listening to scientific sources, not rants, and we're going to figure this out. And if the leader can present as calm, it has, the same impact as picture a high school football game. And a kid gets hurt, and the little student medics can sprint out onto the field. That's nice. What does the doctor do? The doctor walks calmly in a direct line carrying resources. If the doctor ran, probably the stadium would empty out. Everybody else would too. If the doctor stayed in the bleachers, there'd be violence. So leadership needs to present as, I can be human, I can be concerned, but I'm not panicked. Next is efficacy. And sometimes we create victims by taking away what people have power over. It's so easy when something strips us of power, like, a microscopic virus that's spanning the globe. It's so easy to lose a sense of power over anything. And powerlessness is terrifying. So even if people can't be at full functioning, keep them doing something. That sets in place momentum. It's Newton's law that object in motion tends to stay in motion. And helping people understand I can do this versus focusing on what I cannot do is really, really, really important for their long-term life and productivity. So if people fall off a horse, get them back on a pony immediately. And the fifth element is hope. Not platitudes, not artificial hope on a rope, but physicians will all tell you that people who expect to get better are more likely to actually get better. So use plural pronouns and future tense verbs. Say we will, we can, we shall. Think about the many of the major crises that have hit the United States. There was a catch slogan that was more than just platitudes. But there was, we are the Hokies, we will prevail, after Virginia Tech. Northern Illinois was onward together, onward. Colorado is hope. Sandy Hook chooses love. Boston strong. People do rally around those kind of things. So I think leadership that produces those 5 things can really help the people and as employees.
Thank you so much, Bob, for that. I was busy taking notes and forgot to unmute myself. We have an excellent question from one of our attendees who points out that folks have now kind of gotten used to what some people are calling our new normal, right? Either being shut down or working from home. And now we have seen employers start to think towards the future and about getting back up and running, maybe in a modified way, but more people coming back for in-person work. And the question is this: as we employers begin to plan for employees to return to the workplace in the future, I'm concerned that employees will be highly stressed as they return to an environment with other staff in closer proximity. How can we work with our staff to openly discuss those fears?
Well, that's a great question. And I've been doing, virtual briefings with my EAP clients, 4 or 5 a day. And that exact topic has come up the most. It's been, my team usually gets along really well, but they're at each other's throats and they're irritated because we have some people who want to talk about it. And they mitigate their own anxiety by talking about it and getting support and on and on. And there are other people for whom talking about it actually elevates their anxiety. And we have others who cope with stuff like this by just covering their eyes, pretending it isn't there, and hitting their email. And so we have folks who are really irritated or elevated, or we have people who feel unsupported because not everybody deals with it the same way they do. My advice to these work teams is, okay, let's start with acknowledging what we're going through. Okay, let's start with this is stressful, and let's acknowledge that people deal with it differently. So a little emotional intelligence comes into play here. One of which is self-awareness. What's my style? How do I tend to usually deal with things when I'm stressed? Okay, I need to measure myself. Now, can I also read other people? Can I see that if I talk to somebody, they're looking at their watch, they're rolling their eyes, doing those things? so that I take those cues and I maybe go and have a good psychological belch with somebody else, not that person? Or can I read if somebody really needs to talk and I can be there for them? I think leaders are going to just need to acknowledge that and encourage their teams to be particularly sensitive to each other, to offer each other grace, to apologize ahead of time, and just say, okay, nobody in the world has gone through this. In the last century, we haven't gone through something like this before. Nobody's an expert at it, but we're figuring it out, and I'm going to prioritize our relationship along with our productivity. So just acknowledging it's awkward. It reminds me, just before this happened, I was working with a business where there were 3 women who were all pregnant at the same time and had shared a lot of mutual support while it was happening. And 2 of them gave birth to healthy, bouncing babies, and 1 didn't. And they needed just to have a conversation. This is awkward. This is painful. How can we talk about our children with you present? Do we need not to talk about our children with you present? And just to acknowledge that this was a painful, awkward situation really helped them not to fragment and to stay together. And I think that same dynamic is important here on more of a global scale. So you can also share, some people are taking this much more seriously in terms of safety and distancing and cleanliness practices, and some aren't. It may be a good time for leaders to say, this is what it is going to be in our work setting. You can tell people that they can't smoke in the office. You can tell them that they have to wear shoes. You can tell them what the safety practices are here as well. They need your leadership in that. Great question. Next question.
Mary, you want to take the next one?
Sure, I will. So, Bob, thank you for that. I think that was very helpful for me personally and for our audience here. Switching a little bit to EAP programs, and can you speak a bit about how those programs play a role in this current crisis with COVID-19?
I sure will. And immediate disclaimer, I run an EAP, okay? So give a kid a hammer and the world becomes a nail. And so I will start there. I think one of the most important things, I think you can look at this upstream, midstream, and downstream. And if you have developed a good relationship with an EAP that actually wants to be used, okay, and some do and some don't, the economic model, frankly, reinforces not being used very much. It feels like cheating, but I work for a mission-driven nonprofit that is out here to make the world a better place. And so we do want to. But if upstream, you have already built a trusting relationship with your EAP organization such that you know what your utilization is and you know how to access immediate support, and you know who to call for consultation for unique scenarios. You know how to deal with employees who are presenting troubles in the workplace. And you have those protocols and those steps down ahead of time. That's wonderful. Upstream also, if your EAP has been out on site delivering trainings so that people see that we shrink types are actually human also and not all that scary, that's really helpful. EAPs so provide immediate access to counseling. And I know right now at Pine Rest, yes, our inpatient units are seeing people face to face, but all of our clinics, we have about 20 clinics in Michigan, are doing it all through teletherapy. And so it's like a Zoom meeting. It's blue jeans, it's HIPAA compliant, but people can very, very quickly get in, the employee and or anybody in their household, and see somebody. And actually, it's been interesting because we have been trying to convince the general population to use teletherapy for a long time with painstakingly slow rates of adopting it. The same is true in medicine. But during Snowmageddon last winter, there was a nice spike as people couldn't get out of their house and used it. And now our clinics are over 80% booked as contrasted with regular schedules. And it's all taking place through tele. And some of the advantages are if you have a very unique need, perhaps somebody in our Traverse City clinic has that subject matter expertise, and you can get in today to see that person. EAPs also help because we provide other forms of consultation, financial and legal and elder care consultation that's available to take some stressors off of people's plates, and then online resources, because some people would rather read about it or watch a video or take a webinar than to sit down face-to-face with somebody. But I think the biggest advantage of using an EAP well is trying to create a culture where help seeking is okay, where the mental health stigma is reduced. That's a big deal. And in American culture, we're trained that strength is equated with I'm stoic, I'm untouched, doesn't bother me, I'm Teflon. I see something awful, I experience something stressful. People say, how you doing? And I go, fine. That's not a sign of strength. And that's not the sign of people who can run a marathon or lead running through this marathon. When people don't accept help, it's not because they're strong, it's because they're chicken. They're afraid. And so if you have a culture that supports asking for help and supports being able to acknowledge that, no, right now, life has knocked me flat, but within me and above me and around me are the resources for me to bounce back, maybe even to bounce forward. That's incredibly valuable in situations like this.
So that leads right into our next question for you. Mental health is often associated with a stigma, and many employees are experiencing some form of situational depression or anxiety right now because of what's happening. What specific things can leaders do to diminish the stigma? I know you mentioned creating a culture where asking for help is accepted or maybe even encouraged, but can you offer some specifics that leaders can do to help create that kind of culture, and what else can leaders do to get employees help they may need?
Sure. And work is work. It's not group therapy. Okay. I understand that. But a culture where, I've never seen anything as powerful as having a leader who could be somewhat transparent. And you don't have to go make it all about you. You don't have to tell every nitty-gritty detail. But I remember sharing the podium one time with a prominent local pastor who was talking about exactly this topic, about what can the church, which is his organization, do to reduce the stigma. And he pulled a bottle of antidepressants out of his pocket. And he said, I thank God for antidepressants because I wouldn't be in ministry if it wasn't for them. And he didn't have to go into all the details, but whoa, you could have heard a pin drop in that scenario, and you saw eyes connect and you saw heads nod. So to have leaders who can be somewhat transparent, that's powerful. Just reminders, frequent reminders of, there's a mental health awareness month. There's, I know I served as a co-chair of a task force focusing on the workplace to prevent suicide. And this was a Washington, D.C. based organization, the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention. And we looked at what are the industries that have the highest rates of suicide. And people were somewhat surprised in that we found that the construction industry was the highest. And that's a whole nother workshop also. Then we looked at all of the trade journals specific to construction, and there were 16 or so that we selected. And we looked at them and found that in the last 3 years, there had been exactly 0 articles focused upon suicide prevention or postvention. And so we tackled that and had 30-some articles on suicide in their trade journals in the next year. And it continues, and it continues. Just being upfront and not pretending it doesn't exist. The stigma exists. Did you know that the term commit suicide comes from the days when suicide was a crime? And so you said commit suicide, like you'd say committed a bank robbery, committed a felony. Not always, but oftentimes suicide is the most extreme symptom of a disease called depression. So you'd never say somebody committed a heart attack or committed kidney failure. Just changing our language and being honest and dealing with reality about things like that lead people to ask for more help.
Great information, Bob. So you've been talking a bit about being transparent, us as leaders, to our employees. Can you speak a little bit more about what does effective communication look like in this crisis from employers to their employees?
Yeah, sure can. And again, I want to go back, and I don't want participants to say, "Oh gosh, this guy from Pine Rest said we need to turn work into group therapy." No, and I'm not saying it has to be leadership standing up and presenting every foible. But if a leader can stand up and acknowledge, this is hard, and we're going to get through it. I've been through hard, and I've gotten through it, and I'm going to get through it. That's tremendously empowering. So you're a leader, and I want you to think about, do your people trust you? Do your people trust you? Do they see the doctor walking onto the football field for the injured player? And I'm just going to pose that trust has 3 levels. It has competence, character, and compassion. So competence is, do your people trust that you know your stuff, that you're good at things, that even if this is new and nobody knows everything about it, that you are tough enough to handle it and you're going to find good information? Do they trust your character, that you're going to tell them the truth, that you're going to keep your promises, that you're going to abide by ethics and morals and best practices? And do they trust your compassion, that this isn't just about you getting a bonus, that this is, you have an emotional investment in them and in their families? So that's foundational. They have to trust you. Otherwise, anything you say is noise. I also want to say that it's almost like parents in the room have all said, my kids don't hear a word I say. True, but they watch you. And your employees, under stress, become a little more childlike, and they're watching. Can I trust my boss's competence, character, and compassion? And then there are a couple of communication processes I want to throw out there and just let you react to them. One we've trained business leaders all around the world in, and it's ACT, A-C-T. And the A is acknowledge. Sometimes as leaders, we are tempted to minimize, sweep under the rug, pretend, use soft language, and it's self-protective of ourself or our organization. And nothing hurts trust more than that. So I'm going to encourage leaders to fully acknowledge what you're going through and just say, yeah, this is scary. Yes, this is what it is. And to use the real words. Yes, of course, use excellent legal counsel from Miller Johnson as you do so, but to acknowledge. So I'm going to use an example. If, heaven forbid, you lose an employee to COVID, if you can now communicate with your people and you can now visibly be in front of them and say, this is a sad day for Smith & Jones Industries. I am so, so sorry to tell you about the death of our colleague, Richard Johnson. People are going to look and go, whoa, our leader is strong. He used the word death and Richard's name in the same sentence. Our leader was compassionate. Our leader has given us the real scoop. And then you want to acknowledge that loss, understanding that not everybody's going to feel the same. Not everybody's in the same place. You want to build community. Remember, that was one of my 5 things, community. And so you'll acknowledge the impacts on people. And so you may proceed and say, I am so sorry about Richard's death. And I know this, some of you are really close to him, worked with him a long time, maybe did things outside of work. This has to be so hard for you. And some of you maybe didn't know him as well, but were still part of the Smith & Jones family. I don't know, maybe somebody didn't like him. Okay, but we're part of the same team. Now, without making it all about yourself, you want to join them briefly, non-dramatically, but to say, this hits me too. I remember Richard's first day and how proud he was of our progress on that LMNOP project. This is hard. Next, C is to communicate. A was acknowledge, C is communicate. Okay, remember the deer during hunting season, people need information. They need to know, what do we do? They don't need information for the 5-year strategic plan. They need short-sighted, what do we do today? What's right in front of us? They're not thinking as clearly, so they don't need long emails with polysyllabic words and long sentences with commas in them. They need 3 bullets. This is what we know at this time. And you need to deliver it with both competence and compassion. Those words are not mutually exclusive. And I'm emphasizing this because have you ever noticed how high stress tends to make us more of what we already are? High stress tends to turn us into caricatures of ourselves. And people often, leaders often become extremely competent, standing rigidly with a strident voice and talking about bottom lines and protocols, with the reaction of people saying, wow, she or he knows their stuff, but they don't care about me. I'm not following them. Or to become compassionate to the point where, if you blubber, people don't know how to follow a puddle. It's okay to have emotion. It's okay to be impacted, but they need that combination of both. And the T is to transition to a future focus. Again, people who expect to get better are more likely to. So using plural pronouns and future tense verbs, we will, we can, we shall. This is how we're going to resume productivity is really important. So A, C, and T. There's another process that's very parallel. I'll address it quickly. It's called psychological first aid. And there are actually 10 steps to that. But PFA for dummies would be connect, protect, direct. First, make a human name-to-name, face-to-face, person-to-person connection. Next step is, what can I do to provide some comfort or some palliative care, some protection to this person? And then I can be directive and say, this is what we're going to do next. This is what I need you to do next. Under the stress of something like this, leaders too often go straight to direct and tend up not being followed, not experiencing compliance, and not enhancing any loyalty whatsoever. You guys ask good questions.
My turn again, Bob. We've been on the phone and on emails with many of the business leaders in West Michigan, and I'm including in that anyone involved in any human resource position for any organization, because this is a crisis where HR has been out front in leading organizations. This has been a stressful time for those leaders, right? Not just the employees. Up until now, we've been talking mostly about employees and how we as leaders can help them. But I guarantee you this has been a source of extreme stress and anxiety for the leaders themselves. What can they do for self-care during this time?
And, the fact that somebody's been promoted to lead helps me perhaps to profile them. Okay, so I'm going to profile you. There's a good chance that you are neurotically over-responsible to alleviate all human suffering and have to have all the answers for everybody. Oh my gosh, that's stressful. Not only are you facing your own stress as a person, your own stress as an employee, but also your own stress as a leader. And so often when people are in leadership, they focus on my people, my people, my people, my people, and don't take good care of themselves such that they lead ineffectively. So I'm going to take you back to, again, what do people see when you enter the room? Do they see somebody who, yes, is concerned and impacted, but believes and has hope and confidence in their own competence and is going to tell the truth? You need to take care of yourself. If I have a leader who comes in and says, this is what we're going to do, and they look like a wreck, and they act like a wreck, and they are a wreck, okay, I'm not getting in that Uber. I'm not trusting that person to lead me. And so if you don't do it for yourself, I'm going to encourage you to do it for yourself as a leader. You need to be really intentional about self-care. And it's different for everybody, okay? But I'm going to go back to intentional. So because you have to make yourself do it. You have to intend to do it and do it. Otherwise, it's like, well, I'm going to let myself get into shape. How's that working for you? I'm going to let myself lose weight. I'm going to let myself learn Spanish. Yeah, right. You need to say, this is my plan and this is what I'm going to do. Different for everybody. But think, you've been through hard things before. Were there healthy, ethical, legal, sustainable means of getting through that were helpful for you? Do them. You have plans, you have budgets, you have plans for planning the process of planning. What's your resilience plan? And do it. Again, different for everybody. I personally have 5 things I try to do every day. 5 things. And so when I hit the pillow at night, I look, Bob, did you do your 5? And my 5 are faith, family, friends, fitness, fun. So I get up early to read and pray. That's my worldview. Try to be really nice to my wife, engage with my kids every day. Try to work out, which has been tough because our gyms are closed. And the weather hasn't been too great, but I try to do what I can. Walking, running, biking, shooting hoops in the driveway. I'm intentionally reaching out to friends who pump me up. And this is a great opportunity to set some boundaries with the ones who don't. I did a podcast. I was actually this TV show last week with a 3-star general, and he said what he always tells his troops during really tough times. He said is gather your troops and dig a moat. And I love that. I'm not saying being a snob, but be selective about the people you intentionally reach out to. And if you have somebody who presents a crisis du jour, It's amazing how if you wait 1 hour before you answer that text, how oftentimes that crisis goes away, or they get some other sucker to solve it for them. And then fun. I love friends who make me laugh. So for me, it's faith, family, friends, fitness, fun. You pick what works for you, and doggone it, do it.
Bob, you've been giving us some great feedback and practical information that we can take back to our teams and implement and use in our strategy going forward as we continue to maneuver through COVID-19. And we want to be respectful of your time. We're heading in towards this hour here. And so the last question that we have for you is, obviously in West Michigan, our leaders care deeply about their employees. But with the world and laws changing so fast, it's hard to keep up. And many leaders say nothing to their employees out of fear of saying something wrong. What is your advice for leaders who may be uncomfortable talking to their employees regarding how they are feeling during this time?
Well, first and foremost, of course, would be to contact your legal representation, right? Because you want to find out what is the latest. And that relationship is really going to be important to find out what can I say, what should I say, and what would be a really dumb thing to say. So that would be one step. The other is, if you think about press conferences, so often they begin with, "This is what we know at this time." And the people who handle press conferences well are the people who stick with what they know for sure. Because when people are highly anxious and stressed, if they can seduce you into conjecture and predicting and guessing, what you say becomes gospel. And by the time they talk to one other person, that truth has strayed about 6 inches. And by the time they hit their 5th conversation, it doesn't resemble what you said at all. So throw tremendous resources at finding out the truth, communicate only what you know for sure, and update frequently. And that's an important communication piece, is to say, this is what we know at this time. Boom, boom, boom. And we will continue to update you on an hourly, a daily, as indicated basis as new information becomes available. Just don't let them get you to guess.
Great information, Bob. And with that, we're going to conclude our webinar for this morning. Bob, thank you so much for joining Rebecca and me this morning. You have provided so much information for all of us, and we wish everyone a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.